I've been listening to Jordan Peterson talk about this. He has a way of articulating things, which are sometimes hard to understand in the moment, but when I like read it carefully afterwards, it starts to make more sense. I've heard him talk about religion and God as a kind of base layer, like a metaphorical substrate from which morality of our sense of what is right and wrong comes from, and just our conceptions of what is beautiful in life. All these kinds of higher things that are like fuzzy to understand,
Mm-hmm.
that their religion helps create the substrate from which we as a species, like as a civilization, can come up with these notions. And without it, you are lost at sea. I guess for him, morality requires that substrate.
Like you said, it's kind of fuzzy. So I've only been able to get clear vision of it when I live it. It's not something you profess or anything like that. It's something that you take seriously and apply in your life. And when you live it, then there's some clarity there. But that it has to be kind of defined. Like and that's where you come in with the religion and the stories. Because if you leave it completely undefined, I don't really know where you go from there. I actually, to speak to that, I did mushrooms. Have you ever done those before?
Mushrooms, yeah.
I've done them a couple times, but one time didn't do that many. The other time more. And I had a really profound experience in helping couch all this in a proper context for myself. So when I did it, I remember I was sitting on a swing and I could see everything was so blissful, except I could see my black hands like on these chains, like on this swing, but everything else was blissful and kind of amorphous. And I could see the outline of my kids and I could just feel the love for them. And I was just like, man, I just feel the love. It's so wonderful. Why, but then I would, at times I would try to picture them and I couldn't quite picture the kids, but I could feel the love. And then I started asking all the deepest existential questions I could, and it felt like I was just one answer, another answer, another answer. Everything was being answered. And I felt like I was communing with God, whatever you want to say. But I was very aware of the fact that communing was just peeling back the tiniest corner of the infinite. And it just dumped me with every answer I felt like I could have. And it kind of blew me away. So then I asked it, well, if you're the infinite, like, why did you reveal to me yourself? Why did you use like the story of Jesus to reveal yourself? And then that infinite amorphous thing had to somehow take form for us to be able to relate to it. It had to have some kind of a form. But whenever you create a form out of something, you're like boxing it in and subjugating it to boundaries and stuff like that. And then that subject to pain and subject to the brokenness and all that. And I was like, oh, wow. And then, but when I had that thought, then all of a sudden I could relate my like dark hands on the chains to the rest of the experience. And then all of a sudden I could picture my children as the children rather than this amorphous feeling of love. It was like, oh, there's Alana and Altai and Zaya. But then they were bounded. And then once they're bounded, you're subject to the death and to the misunderstanding and to the all that. And I was, like, I picture the amoeba or the cell. And then when it dies, it turns into a unformed thing. And so we need some kind of form to relate to. So instead of always just talking about God completely intangibly, it kind of gave me a way to relate to it. And I was like, oh, wow, that was really powerful to me in putting it in a context that was applicable.
But ultimately, God is sort of the thing that's formless, that is unbounded.
Right.
But we humans need, that's the purpose of stories. They resonate with something in us. But when you need the sort of the bounded nature, the constraints of those stories, otherwise we wouldn't be able to
can't relate to it.
Yeah. And then when you look at the stories literally, or you just look at them just as they are, it seems silly. Just too simplistic.
Right. And then that was always, a lot of my family and loved ones and friends have completely left the faith. But I totally, in a way, I get it. Like, I understand, but I also really see the baby that's being thrown out with the bathwater, and I want to cherish that in a way, I guess.
And it's interesting that you say that the way to know what's right and wrong is you have to live it. Sometimes it's probably very difficult to articulate, but in the living of it, do you realize it?
Yeah, and I'm glad you say that, because I found a lot of comfort in that, because I feel somewhat inarticulate a lot of the times and unable to articulate my thoughts, especially on these matters.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just think I just have to, but I do have to, I can live it. I can try to live it, And then what I also am struck with right away is I can't, because you can't love everybody. You can't love your enemies, and you can't, but as placing that in front of you as the ideal is so important, to put like a check on your human instincts, on your tribalism, on your, you can very quickly, like we talked about with evil, it can really quickly take its place in your life. You almost won't observe it happening, but, and so I so much appreciate all the me striving. And that's where, I grew up in a Christian family. So I had these like cliches that I didn't really understand, like a relationship with God. Like, what does that mean? But then I realized when I struggled with I actually did try to take it seriously and struggle with what does it mean to live out a life of love in the world. But that's like a wrestling match, because it's not that simple. It sounds good, but it's really hard to do. And then you realize you can't do it perfectly, but in that struggle, in that wrestling match, is where I actually sense that relationship. And that's where it kind of gains life, and how that really, and that, I'm sure that relates to what Jordan Peterson is, getting at in his metaphor.
Yeah, in the striving
Right.
of the ideal, in the striving towards the ideal, you discover how to be a better person.
One thing I noticed really tangibly on Alone was that, because I had so many people that were close to me kind of just leave it all together, I was like, I could do that. I actually understand why they do. Or I could not. I do have a choice. And so I had to choose at that point to maintain that ideal. And because I could add enough time on Alone, the one nice thing is you don't have any distractions. You have all the time in the world to go into your head. And I could play those paths out in my life. And not only in my life, but I feel like societally and generationally, like, I'd throw it all away and everybody start from square one, or we can try to, redeem what's valuable in this and wrestle with it. And so I chose that path.
Well, I do think it's a kind of wrestling match, because you mentioned Gulag Archipelago. I'm very much a believer that we all have the capacity for good and evil, and striving for the ideal to be a good human being is not a trivial one. You have to find the right tools for yourself to be able to be the candle, as you mentioned before.
I like that.
And for that, religion and faith can help. I'm sure there's other ways, but I think it's grounded in understanding that each human is able to be a really bad person and a really good person. And that's like a choice. It's a deliberate choice. And it's a choice that's taken every moment and builds up over time. And the hard part about it is you don't know. You don't always have the clarity using reason to understand what is good and what is right and what is wrong. You have to kind of live it with humility and constantly struggle. Because then, you might wake up in a society where you're committing genocides, and you think you're the good guys. And I think you have to have the courage to realize you're not. It's not always obvious.
It isn't, man.
And only history has the clarity to show who were the good guys and who were the bad guys.
Right. You gotta wrestle with it. It's like that quote, the line between good and evil goes through the heart of every man, and we push it this way and that. And our job is to work on that within ourselves.
Yeah, that's the part that's what I like. Sort of the full quote talks about the fact that it moves. It moves the line moves moment by moment, day by day. We have the freedom to move that line. So it's like it's a very deliberate thing. It's not like you're born this way and it's it.
Yeah, I agree.
And especially in in conditions that are like war and peace. In the case of the camps, absurd levels of injustice. In the face of all that, when everything is taken away from you, you still have the choice to be the candle, like the grandmas.
Yeah.
By the way, the grandmas in like all parts of the world are like the strongest
Shout out
humans.
to the grandmas. Seriously.
It's like, I don't know what it is. I don't know. They have this like wisdom that comes from patience and have seen it all. Have seen all the bullshit of the people that come and gone, all the abuses of power, all of this. I don't know what it is. And they just keep going.
Right.
It's just,
Yeah, that's so true.